Good evening and welcome to Gaming Ballistics Firing Squad. This is a continuation of the series of interviews that we're doing for the Role-Playing Game Blog Association March Blog Carnival. The topic for this month is virtual tabletops and online gaming. And I am pleased to welcome to the firing squad Doug Davison from Fantasy Grounds. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thanks for having me, Doug.
So what is your position and role in Fantasy Grounds? You're the lead developer, I believe?
I'm actually the president. We're a two-person company, basically. So we both do a little bit of development. John Gregory is the other developer. He's been kind of taking over the lead development role lately, and I've been kind of managing the web, the contracting, getting new content, and accounting, finance, that sort of thing, and some development whenever time permits.
Excellent, excellent. So how long has Fantasy Grounds been a thing? When did it first go live?
It first went live actually around 2005, if I remember correctly. So it was developed originally by three gentlemen out in Finland, and we purchased the company from them in 2009. So I acquired the company and then brought John in. We were both community members at that point in time. We were users of the software in a sense, and we were also developers by trade. So we found how easy it was to extend the product and to make it customized to what we kind of saw it needed to be. And then John had actually written a Dungeons and Dragons compatible like 4th edition rule set for it, and I had written some Star Wars Saga edition rule sets for it. And we just kind of on a whim made an offer to him and acquired the company, and then we've had it ever since.
Excellent. So the question that I was going to sort of ask is, what led you to develop a new VTT, but since it was already extant, so what was so compelling about it that you wanted to form a company and acquire it yourself?
Sure. I think it was just the extensibility of it and to see how powerful the setup was and how easy it was for us to get in and just to make our own content. So John had come in, he had done a lot of work from other virtual tabletops. There's one called Works, which I think is still out there. We had both looked at like map tools, some of the other tools that were out there. And just from a user perspective, we both gravitated towards Fantasy Grounds at some point in time. I think it was a look and feel. It was very polished, well designed and planned from an architectural standpoint that as a software developer just fit very well for me.
And it's the extension of the rules. You mentioned that you had done, or your partner had done the Dungeons and Dragons. You had done Star Wars. Is this something that you really have to be a coder to extend, or can Joe Blow get in there and make a rule set?
Yeah, there's to make a rule set, I think you absolutely do have to be a coder to really do much substantial. I mean, if you're just going to take a basic rule set that only needs a few tweaks here and there, and you're going to add some extra functionality, or you're going to customize one aspect, you can kind of go out there and look and see how things have been done in the past, copy those sorts of things. Lots of trial and error, basically. But I would say to do one from scratch, you would absolutely have to be a coder. XML is kind of used to lay out the graphics, so a lot of times people will reskin it and they don't have any coding background, but they're just able to open up the XML files, kind of see how things are laid out. We have a lot of documentation, a lot of support for other developers and artists to go in and modify it.
Okay. Talking broadly about virtual tabletops and gaming aids, what do you think that the most important features are in general for so what are the best and worst features of a virtual tabletop?
I think different people look for different things in virtual tabletops, and so we even see that from one rule set to the next rule set, because some systems really focus heavily on movement on a map, tactical grid, kind of combat, where it's all about the automation, it's all about kind of showing where your character is in relation to the other characters and the monsters and NPCs and so forth. Whereas, some systems like Call of Cthulhu is more story driven. So you want to better focus on being able to do handouts to players to set the mood and set the tone within the game. And so that kind of drives it. So that's one of the things I really liked about Fantasy Grounds, is that I saw that it had the capability to basically do most of those things for each player. But I think setup is important. You have to be able to set up and run quickly. Ideally, you should be able to run it, from the seat of your pants if you want to, or if you're the type of GM that prepares long things in advance, you should be able to prepare those in advance and then work that way. So I think it kind of caters to Fantasy Grounds specifically will cater to a lot of those different audiences. There are other virtual tabletops which do one or more aspect maybe better than Fantasy Grounds, but I think collectively Fantasy Grounds brings a lot of those sorts of functions to the table.
So why don't we take the opportunity to bring up a view of Fantasy Grounds. You can walk us through some of the coolest features.
Sure. So I'm going to start off with a view of the player's kind of screen, and then from there we can kind of expand out. So if we were to look at, see if that shows up. Okay, so this is what a player would see within the Pathfinder compatible rule set. And so the D&D ones will look very similar. A lot of the other ones will be similar. Even GURPS has kind of the same basic feel, just with different attributes and skills that may be tracked in that system. The automation may be a little bit different depending on what it is. So in that sense, almost every game system that you're going to play is going to have a form of a character sheet. And that's one of the things that Fantasy Grounds does very, very well, especially for rule sets that are pre-designed, and there's about 25, I think, or so different rule sets out there that are supported. So here's an example where you've got your strength, your stats, all that sort of stuff, and you can kind of come in and just fill out your values and change them. You'll see that it has a little bit of automation. Your modifiers change. You can change those kind of on the fly. But the nice thing is you see there's a little dice box here. You can actually pick it up, and when you roll that dice into the chat window, this shares that dice roll with every other connected player. So here it has the portrait of the player that rolled it, the D20 with the modifier, and the total result. So you can instantly kind of see if you were successful or not there, and then you can also just double click on those as well, and it will roll it and share it. So there's a couple things going on here. One is the chat window, which is shared. So as multiple players get in, they're also they're rolling dice and they're saying let's go and attack and so forth. So I think this kind of gives you a running log. Some people have one of our community members built a chat log scrubber, which this is saved to disk after each session, so they post it up at the conclusion of their game. So if someone was had to bail out of the game early or was unable to attend one week, they can kind of see what happened, and they can edit that out and determine, do you want to share the dice rolls or do you only want the story portions there?
That's really neat. I mean, one of the things that I like to do is I've played I played Pathfinder, Swords and Wizardry, some GURPS, even some Trail of Cthulhu once or twice. While I'm not running the game, I like to transcribe. I'll actually frequently just throw up a blog post almost within minutes of the game being over, and one of the things that I'll do is pull from the chat logs, because sometimes people put things in chats that are just cool or hysterical or whatever, and it's that ability to do the chat is pretty cool. Is there a capability for multiple chat windows?
There is not, but there is some basic support. Like if I was to go through, see, we've got some kind of general kind of help commands here. So there's some generic commands that are, I know that's maybe hard to see there, but you have you can whisper to each other, you can whisper to another character, to the GM. You can do a vote, for instance, that the GM can launch and say, are you ready to, let's see, vote, continue on. Then it would basically prompt that for each player, and they would just say, okay, yeah, I'm ready to go. So if you have 4 or 5 players connected, they would all check, and then you can say, okay, we're all ready to proceed. So after your bathroom breaks, that sort of thing. But so you can do some of those basic functions that you would see in like a MMO or something like that. You can do that sort of thing. And then you also have, here you've got a chat window, you've got an action window. So depending on what you do, you can hold down a key, like a shift key or alt key or whatever, and change the mode. Are you going to emote something, or are you going to be out of character and say, I need a break? Then you can hold down and you can say, okay, well, is that actually, I get the right keys there. So here you can go to out of character basically, and it'll color it differently.
So effectively you've got multiple chat windows within the same window.
Exactly, all going into the same window.
And
all your dice rolls also drop into there. And then there's also, you see there's a dice tower here in the corner. So let's say, for instance, I'm going to show real quick, you've got some combat and then you've got like a skills. So if the GM was to whisper to you and say, okay, I want you to, if you're trying to sneak past the goblin, then maybe you have to roll a stealth roll, but he doesn't want you to know if you're successful or not. So,
okay, sure.
Let me give him some actual ability here. So he's got, let's say maybe a +2 stealth. So he would drop that in the box, and it just says, okay, I've rolled a hidden roll.
Oh, that's sweet.
And here was my modifier. So I had a +2 to that. However, the GM will then see that, okay, we actually got a 7, and they can choose to share that later on if they want, or they can just let the story unfold and then kind of play it out accordingly. So as the player sneaks past the goblin and thinks he's successful, at the last second the goblin swings out with his hammer and hits him on the toe, or whatever the case may be.
Neat. Okay. All right. And so you mentioned that it's got multiple support. I mean, obviously Pathfinder is a good one to start with,
Sure.
and you could end there, but it sounds like you had 20, 25 systems that you could also do. You did send me a link to a neat demo on how to export from GURPS Character Assistant into Fantasy Grounds, and I will link that later. But I haven't seen the full capability of the GURPS rule support, but it exists. So from my perspective, that's actually one up on many sets, which is kind of neat.
Exactly. And the installs on these custom rule sets, whenever we have a rule set that's been out there for a while in the community and it's kind of been vetted to a certain extent, doesn't have, it can't have any proprietary content that's owned by a publisher, that sort of thing. So we kind of review that before we post it up on our system, but we do have a wiki link directly on our webpage with a list of every rule set that we have supported. So if you click through to that, each page will have its own entry with a description of how to install it, and it's seriously like a 5-minute install. You just download the file, stick it in the right folder, and when you start your next campaign, you have an option to say, I want to create a GURPS campaign, or I want to create a D&D 4th edition compatible campaign, whatever.
So as you do campaign creation as a game master, I'm working up a campaign right now, GURPS Alien Menace, which is going to be a mashup of XCOM and Monster Hunters, a little bit of the second Aliens movie, kind of dungeon fantasy in space. Go to the alien planet, kill them, and take their stuff. So as I'm working this campaign up, let's say I import the GURPS rule set, as a game master, how do I do maps or NPCs or bring in, or let's pretend that I'm going to do all that in Pathfinder because you've got that up and it's easy. So how do I walk through campaign locations or maps or whatever?
Got it. Okay, so let me switch right back to the screen share again real quick. This time I'm going to show you the GM's view, basically. So this one, if I can pull it up, I don't know if I'm showing you. I think I'm showing you the player one again. Hold on, let me switch.
So do you have multiple instances of the program open, or is there a GM?
Yeah, actually. Yeah, and that's one of the things that's really nice, especially for budding GMs and for people who are new to Fantasy Grounds, because it takes a little bit of time to figure out, okay, well, what is the player going to see when I do this operation within the game? And so you'll see more functionality. So here, as an example, let's see, you can pull up any of the characters that are logged in, the players. I can see all the same sort of stuff that they have. So if they have a question about their character, hey, can my character do this or that or whatever, I can specifically see their skills and abilities. And here's examples where they have content linked that is clickable and then pulls up more information about what that specific feat or skill has. I can create my own characters. If I want someone to play a playable character for a while and I want to create that character, I would just go in and create a new character here, say add a character, fill out a new character sheet, and then at that point in time when a new player logs in or an existing player, they can take control of this character and then run that character. The nice thing that you can do from when you're building your campaigns is you would go through and you would build a set of stories. So I'm going to show you an example of one of our stories, which is actually a product you could purchase. It's like an add-on product. We try to support a lot of different content publishers. So here is an example of an OGL product called Crypt of the Sun Lord, and you can see this one is actually by the Adventure Week folks. I don't know if you've talked with them at all in the past, but
I haven't talked to them, but Liz Tice from RealmWorks from Lone Wolf Development mentioned them several times as really cool content creators.
Yeah, very cool. They just did a Kickstarter for Rise of the Drow, and they're currently working on getting that converted to Fantasy Grounds as well. But all of these screens here are really just text, and so you can come through and you can type in whatever you want. I can come through and just edit this just like you would kind of a Word document. You can add content and say, okay, well, this is tune. And so if you're a big prepper, or if you wanted to share this adventure later on, if you're just a content developer, you can come through and say, you can make it look professional. Someone else can come through and they read, this is all your GM text on the adventure. Here you're clicking through, there's let's see if there's an adventure hook. All of these are links to other sections in the story. I'm going to try to get to one that actually has. Okay, so here's an example where they've typed up some box text. So they could obviously, if they're on a Skype or a Google Hangout, they could just read this part out when they got to that part. Or maybe a combination, or they click this little button to say share it with the window, and it writes it out, and you'll see that it wrote it to the chat window. So all the logged in players will see that. And then you can have branching scripts and that sort of thing, and say, okay, well, if the PCs have make a successful sense motive roll, then I'll share this information, I'll share that information. Same thing with your images. You can click and pull up an image. Shrink this down. Whoops. Wrong way there. So here you could just right-click and say share that image. You share it with the players, and now the players would see that. And I'm only showing, I guess, the one screen on my share, but that basically pops up instantly on the player's window. And then you can also choose to share with just individual players by dragging an image directly to that player's portrait, and it will share it with them. So, for instance, if the party was to split up and try to go in multiple directions, when the one guy walks in on the beholder, you just share that with him, and then his
surely no one would ever split the party.
No one ever does that.
No one would ever do that.
But we do support it if they do.
Right.
So here's like some examples of, this one's really nicely organized. If you wanted to add more content, like let's say, for instance, right after this section, there was an image, and then you wanted to have another image, then you could just type and say, okay, I want a new image 2 or whatever, give it a probably nicer name, and you go to your list of all your images, and here's a link to the folder. So you could just store an image that you downloaded from the internet. I guess, again, the screen share is not going to show that one, but it pops up your Windows Explorer window. You drop the file in there, and then it instantly becomes available. So then you just drag it, and it makes that linkable. So now,
very cool, very cool.
Now when you're ready to launch that image, you just click it, and when you're ready for that part of the image, it actually shows up. So that one is, well, I guess that's just a big burlap sack. I don't know what that particular image is, but
it's the inside of a bag of holding.
Yeah, evidently. But like, here's an example. So you would have a GM map. The other nice thing is that you can also link story entries on a map. So here, let me see if I can see. So here's at Area 6, for instance. If you were to link Area 6 to where it says 6, you could just hold down your Control key, and when you drag it over, it will make a push pin. So I've got that, I've got 7, I've got 5. So very quickly, if you develop all your content in advance, when you're ready to run that part of the map, you just hold it down, and they say, okay, I'm going to go down this hallway. You click on it, and then this is your room description and any combats that might occur in that room. Here's an encounter with a black bear. And so in this case, if you're developing this, you would just create a new encounter, a blank one, and then enter in any monsters that you have. So you could pull that from like a library. Here's like a list of D20 monsters that might be available. It comes with a bestiary of all D20 SRD content already. So here I could just grab and say, okay, I want to do maybe a dire bat. So you drag that into your encounter. If the encounter is not tough enough by default, you can just do that, and then you assign a token. Let me show you if I can find a bat. This will work. That would probably work for a bat. Drop that in there, and then say, okay, I've got 3 of those, for instance. And then when you're ready to have your combat encounter, here's all of your stats for your NPCs. Again, you can just unlock this and type in. It's in read-only. I'm in a module right now, but these are clickable. So your bite attack, you can click and roll it, and it adds your modifier with your bite. Let me get rid of this window in the background. You can actually roll this on a player directly as well. So the combat tab is where a lot of times, once you have your NPCs, like if they were to write, I'm sorry, I'm hopping around a lot here. Like let's say they had this encounter with a black bear
and 3 bats.
Fire bats, then you just, when you're ready to run that encounter, you click on this button that says Add Encounter to the Combat Tracker. It drops them in, rolls their initiative if you have that preference set, and then you're off and ready to go. And then on the maps, let me see if I have a map here too. I need like an encounter map. Let's see. The same thing. You would basically position them where they are on the map. Let me zoom in. to part of this. And then you could, you know, say, well, this guy's going to start there. Oh, he's big.
This is one of those cases where it's like, so how did the dragon get in the 20-foot by 20-foot room?
Exactly. So, and then you'll see here he's kind of grayed out.
Yeah.
That's because he's invisible. As soon as you become visible to the players, you could mark him as visible. You could also do same sort of thing if you mask it. Then as they move in and out of your masked area, so you reveal parts of the map as you explore. But so that's kind of the guys moving around on map. Let me put a player here, and then I'll show you one of what we kind of consider the coolest, some of the coolest features. So you got your player here and here, and then when you're ready to do this bat's attack, I think it's actually, I'm going to clear out some of these goblins since we don't have goblins in this particular encounter.
I love the little dead guy icon.
Yeah. There we go. Okay, so we have basically one, we've scaled it down a little bit. There's one bat and a, okay, this goblin needs to go too. One
Don't they all?
And a dire bat. Yeah. So it's this guy's turn, Jonah's turn, and as a player, I'll show you that in just a second, but as the GM, when it becomes this bat's turn, you'll see here's a quick list of the most common things you might do. So he's only really got a bite attack, and then if I wanted to see his full stats, you just click here, and then you can go and see, okay, well, did he have a perception? Did he succeed at seeing the guy? So you would roll that, and you would see kind of in the background. Normally I have my screen blown up a little bit larger, but you would see...
Yeah, he rolled a 29. I think he saw people.
Yeah, he saw him, I guess. And if you want to share that with the players, you could just, you know, share it, and then they would see it in the chat window. And then when you're ready to do your attack, you just kind of drag your bite attack, drop it on the target, and it'll come back and it'll tell you, oh, you missed, or you hit, or whatever. I'm going to expand this a little bit more. Hopefully it's still viewable for you guys.
Yeah, you've got a couple more inches on either side of my screen.
Oh, let me make it larger then, because I'm not quite using as much real estate as I normally do. I normally run it across two monitors, is what I traditionally do. I find that gives me lots of room. But here you'll see that the attack was really just a 12, and it automatically rolled it against his dexterity. And something like 4th edition, oh, this thing is like a godsend for combat, because they have all sorts of attacks, which sometimes they affect your reflex, sometimes they're against your AC, sometimes they're against that. So the attack is actually coded to say what it's going against, and it rolls against that on the target. So again, in this situation, you missed, you move on, but had you hit, let me get rid of some more screens here. All right, so had you hit, you just hover over the damage portion, and it becomes 1d8 plus 4. Drop that on the character, and you'll see that it increased the damage, and now he's got 18 points of damage on him, because it added 11. I guess he had 7 before, and then it just kind of allows you to automate your combat very quickly. Here's an example where you've got, this is kind of neat, so I'm going to just move this guy. I assume he could make all that movement. As the bear moves down to this guy, you've got, you know, your claw attack or a bite attack. And you see as I hover over each one, it's going to pick up and roll it separately. So that would be your one claw attack, for instance, and it would hit or miss, or your bite attack. And it really is just as you type it in. So if I wanted to give him a new attack, let's say he's got a tail attack because he gets, I don't know, some spell which gives him a tentacle tail or whatever, I could say or tentacle, and just use the same format basically. So say it's a 1d6 plus 8, and it's actually tentacle plus, let's say it's a pretty good chance odds of hitting. So now as I hover over it, now I've got a tentacle attack. So again, I could drop that, and it shares that I've got a tentacle attack. The other things that are nice from a GM perspective is you've got your modifiers. So if for some reason he gets a +2 modifier on the next roll for whatever reason,
sure,
that same attack, it'll roll it, and then it'll share, okay, I got my tentacle attack +2, but it actually gave me a total of a +11 on that particular attack. Those things will add up, and you can have a whole series of different things that you might add on for different reasons. That's one of the things, especially in like 4th edition and D&D and Pathfinder, there's all sorts of different things which go on. So let's say he's power attacking, so I'm going to add that modifier in, and let's give him another modifier called flanking or combat advantage or whatever. We'll get a +2 to that. So as I add these things in, he's got a -1 from that, but a +2 from flanking, so he has a net +1. And then let's say he's also blessed, so I'm going to add a bless in here. because typically you've got wizards in the party throwing
Oh, sure.
all
Buffing
sorts
and
of
stuff.
modifiers
Yeah.
and buffs and debuffs, and all those things add up. And so this kind of gives you a running total of all the modifiers on your next attack roll.
And at least looks like each filled dot is an individual modifier you can look at.
And you can remove them the same way too. So like, let's say for instance, I load all these up, and then the GM is looking at the same screen, and he says, you've got all these things, you need to take off your flank attack or whatever. You just click on that, and it removes it, and the modifier drops back down. So now I have bless offset by my power attack, basically, which is a -1. So if you want to add it back in, you just add in your flank, and then when you roll your attack, it should demonstrate. So here's the attack roll, was basically a power attack. I had a -1 from power attack.
Oh, it labels it all. That's neat.
So everybody knows how you got to your magic number, because sometimes, we all know we've gamed with players who occasionally their math doesn't quite add up to the same result that you would add up. So that kind of alleviates that, and it just does it all on the fly. The other thing that's nice is it looks for the keyword "and." So here's the full attack option for this character. So he has 2 claws and a bite attack, each with different modifiers, with different stuff going on there. So as you can see, it's going to pick up 3 dice, and as it rolls them, it will tell me, okay, which one's hit or missed. And here, in this case, it was a critical hit. It rolled automatically. Looks like I don't have my critical hit table turned on, but if I have my critical hit table, that's a table you can customize, and it'll automatically roll on that and then tell you what the result is.
I wonder if the GURPS rule set automated the critical hit table or not.
They do, actually. I saw that there's an extension for that. So if you go to our wiki and you go to the GURPS page, there's an extension with a table. So what that will typically look like is there's I need to turn on that module. So to activate a module, these are the various modules that I've loaded already. You just come in, and this will show you a list of all the things you have installed that are compatible with this rule set.
Oh, sure.
And so one of the things about Fantasy Grounds is we have several hundred add-ons out there that are various products. So some of them are supplements or settings, books of different monsters. They might be an adventure that's pre-done, like from Adventure Week, or Expeditious Retreat Press has a lot of them. But one of these in here, I think I've got a default. There we go. There's my default and critical hit tables. I'm going to load that in, and now you'll see. So see, it added a new little section basically within my table list. So now I've got my critical hit. Here, if they roll a 1 to 4, it'll say yes, it is a critical hit, or a 5 to 6 will make it a critical hit effect. It'll roll on a subsequent table. So you can have like chain tables. So if I roll a 1, let's see if I can get a 5 or 6, it should roll automatically on my next one. Well, it's rolling lots of 1s. Good thing this isn't. There we go. Okay, so I finally got a 5 or 6, and then it rolled on the subsequent table, and it told me, okay, well, the critical hit effect was that there's a parry which occurred. So I guess you get an automatic parry on the next attack. And here you can customize that the same way, and you can make your own list, basically. Any kind of table that you want. Here's an example where I put in dungeon low-level CR2 creatures. And so if you're just trying to figure out, okay, well, this is a random encounter table, you just put in, okay, I want to roll a D100, and then this to this, a 1 to 6 makes it 1 to 6 dire rats. And then so you can make all the tables that are in your game of choice. That's functionality that's built into every rule set. You can just kind of add your own tables and create them on the fly.
So if you want to do that, is that something that's more graphical, or is that something where, again, you have to code the XML yourself?
No, and thankfully, this is one of the things you can do directly in the system. So if I want to add a new table, so you just come in, you say add, and then here I can say, okay, well, how many rows do you want? I want a 4-row table, for instance, and I want, let's see, 2 columns. So here, by default, it's a D8. Okay, so you can come through and say it's windy outside, or it's rainy, or snowing, whatever the case may be.
Sure.
And then when you're ready, then you just say, okay, you can roll it. And here you can put in a name. I can call it weather randomizer. In the description, whatever you want to make it. And then this determines if you want the result to be hidden. So as a GM, if you want to be able to roll things and not share the result with the players, then the GM will see it in the chat window. All the other players won't see that in the chat window. And then unless you share it out later on, which you can always do. Even with
how can you change the dice? So let's say that I, for example, just hypothetically, want to do 3d6.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see. That's a good question, actually. So 3d6, now you're testing my ability to remember here. So I think if you just keep adding rows, let's see, let's make this a 12. I think this is a single dice roll, unfortunately. To do a 3d6, you could do your regular 3d6 by just kind of, picking up the dice and then rolling 3d6 here. But as far as having a nice lookup table, that's something that this one is really just kind of focusing on a single dice roll, I believe.
Okay.
Let's see. Yeah, I think that is, unfortunately. But that is a good extension. I'm sure that there's a lot of game systems now that I think about it, and I'm surprised we hadn't thought about that previously, where you are rolling 2d6 or 3d6 or whatever. I know we have some rule sets where you roll dice and then you drag it to a table lookup, and it automatically tells you what it is. So that would be relatively easy for us to do as well.
Right. And like, for example, I don't know if you're familiar with the D30 Sandbox Companion. That is something by New Big Dragon Games where you could create, it's almost like you could automate an entire hex crawl.
Oh, yeah.
With rolling D30s. I actually automated in Excel very, very quickly an adventure generator. There's I think 10 columns or something like that, and it's, what's the key NPC and what's the trigger and what's the plot line and blah, blah, blah. And it's, it's something like 500 trillion combinations at the touch of a F9 key. And so it seems like this would be something where, depending on how sophisticated the die rolling could get, you could have an encounter generator, which is a series of. It just seems like, especially for on-the-fly stuff, it would be possible to automate something like that, where you'd be like, generate me an encounter, and bam, it would go through a series of die rolls and give you what you need.
Yeah.
Could it even do that and then automatically populate in the combat tracker the creatures that it rolls up?
Yeah, it could. It's really just a matter of how much automation you want to put in, ultimately. Like, for instance, one of the things that I've been recently coding on is with Green Ronin has an advanced bestiary that they just had their Kickstarter on as well. And one of the things that's really cool about it is it's got templates. And so you have basically an NPC or a series of NPCs and a series of templates that you might want to apply to them, like a skeletal version of the goblin or a lich dog or whatever the case may be. So that's something where really there's a need for it to say, okay, well, you're going to have to go through these series of rules and steps to modify the base creature and turn it into a new creature. Then the way I coded it up just in my own mindset was to have one section where I say, okay, input your templates on one side, and then or drag and drop basically your templates on one side, drag and drop your NPCs on the other, and then hit this button and it spits out the new version on the bottom. So it's creating new characters, it's creating new NPCs, and doing all that sort of stuff on the fly. The same thing by here you have your encounters, here's your NPCs, and here's an encounter. So the same thing. Here's a list of all these encounters. This was something that at one point in time, we just said, okay, we want to be able to have a series of, a list of this type of object that we want to have stored in here. And when we hit this button, it's going to do all of these automations.
Sure.
It's going to drop them all into the combat tracker. So all of those things could be all kind of combined into one. And in fact, the code's probably there. It's just a matter of calling the code. And then from a programmer's perspective, you just create an extension in a certain format and stick it in the right folder, and it will load that extension in addition to the base rule set.
Okay.
You can have multiple extensions loaded too.
Does the one more GURPS question? Does your program support hexes or just squares?
It does. It does support hexes and squares. So if I was to pull up, let me see if I have any other maps here. Okay, here we go. Okay, so I'm going to pull up. Okay, well this one's obviously that's a GM map. Let me grab a little higher resolution. Okay, so this one is really high resolution.
Right.
And this is obviously grids, a square grid. So first I'll show you real quickly the square grid. So you come into a map that you download from the internet, and it obviously has a grid, but our program doesn't know anything about what size square fits that grid. So you apply a layer on top, and there's a set grid layer. And so typically you go from the top of one corner down to the bottom of another one, and it rolls our grid over top of it.
Oh, sweet.
And so it's really that simple. And then when you have your NPCs moving around, then they scale and they fit just perfectly. The other thing you can do too is as you if you wanted to make them larger, bigger, you can kind of do that on a per token.
That's what those numbers are. 1.7 grid squares.
Yeah, exactly. So so you can do all of that sort of function, pretty easily, and then you can also just clear that grid off, and then you can set a different type of grid, change grid to hex grid.
Oh, there you go.
And this is going to look a little silly, so I'll do it off kind of to the side here. So set the hex grid. So you would do a similar thing and say, okay, well, I have maybe it's still 75 pixels, if you can get to there. And then it rolls out. Now you've got hex grids. So as you're moving around, you're inside your hex system.
Okay. I think I saw you set facing on the bear earlier.
Yeah, I did actually, and so it comes with a lot of tokens built in. And if you look at like our character tokens, like if I was to use like a top-down token instead, which would be perfect for a hex grid system.
Yep.
So let me actually get rid of Jonah, and I'm going to replace him with the top-down version of it. So Jonah's going to be a human female spellcaster all of a sudden. Let's see.
She got hit with a polymorph.
Okay. So now, Jonah will. I drag Jonah to the map. As I just mouse wheel, Jonah.
Okay, sure.
And you can zoom in or out. You see that she'll scale with it now that I zoom in or out. That's called a locking token scale. So here you can release the token scale, and as I zoom, so if I wanted her to fit perfectly in one of those hex grids, I can make her bigger or smaller, and then once I lock it, then all tokens of that size will shrink or grow in relation to the map at the same size. So it makes it really easy to move around.
So one thing that's with GURPS at least, and because it's typically a 1 yard hex, and this is not all GURPS all the time. It's just that it happens to be that's the system that I think in, and one of the deals though is that so I wrote a book about grappling, and if I take Jonah and throw him down, all of a sudden he's 2 hexes long.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
Is there a facility for multiple tokens depending on posture or anything like that? Without going through all the different choices that you just did?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with one other than you could make them, you could shrink them or grow them a little bit maybe.
Right.
Let's see. You could switch out the token, like if you had 2 versions of the token, one with them prone.
Right, exactly. I'm just wondering if that's something where you could have Jonah and you have your top-down token, your prone token, maybe there's a kneeling token, and you could just toggle between them without having to do click, drag, switch, whatever. That would be kind of awesome.
Yeah, no, and definitely from like a programmer's perspective, what you would probably do is you would make, instead of just having one token spot, let's see where Jonah is, you see it's got like a single token option.
Yep.
I would imagine that you would probably add a tab with a list of all the different poses.
And
then you could link that with scripts. So there's all sorts of scripts you can do here where you can click on it and you could do various things. So you could say, okay, I want these menu options. Yeah, maybe the menu option is go prone, go stand, kneel, all that sort of thing. You could play around with those and link that code up to then say, okay, now go back to the base character that token is linked to and pull this token instead. Switch which graphic is rendered.
Okay, so that would be something where if you wanted to have like a little table of 4 or 5 different, you have the top-down token standing, you've got one that's prone, you've got a prone one with blood in the background or something, which would be, you're unconscious or dead. You could kind of right-click on the token, pull up the token menu, select, and then boom, so it's click, click, done.
Yeah, absolutely.
But obviously you need to be pretty good. You need to script it.
Sure.
No, that's really neat. And honestly, this has been so. What are fog of war or vision blocking or light illumination or any of the sort of classic?
So what we typically have is I'm sorry, I'm kind of.
You had mentioned masking earlier.
Here you go in and you got your layers. Again, it's another layer on top, and you see it says enable mask. Okay. So from a GM perspective, you drop the map on it, the mask on it, and then the GM can see where everything is. It's kind of like a fogged out version of it. The player won't see anything until you cut it away. So as you cut away portions, it'll expose that part for the player. You see they don't see the same level of detail. And let's see, you see, in the background, that's the GM version. So they have a little bit more information that gets exposed. And as I expose more, oops, that was the wrong idea to do it. But you'll see that it takes just a second, and then it cuts away that part of the map. You can also freeform cut too. So by default, we figured that most of the time you're going to be, drawing nice kind of squares that you reveal, but you can also kind of hold down your shift key and you can do circles and whatever the case may be. So you can expand things out that way. One of the features that's on our wish list, and that I know that some other virtual tabletops have, is like the lighting linked specifically to a character. So if they're carrying around torches, and maybe even rely upon knowledge about, does the character have dark vision or this or that or whatever, block line of sight with doors, that sort of thing.
Right.
We've opted for what we think is a simpler setup, basically. So you just load a map similar to when you're actually playing around a tabletop, and you would say, okay, well, clearly there's a wall there. Your character, from where they're located, is not going to be able to see through that wall.
Right. So there's a certain amount of player agency to it.
Absolutely.
Right. But you could also probably link an unmasking 20-foot circle that was linked to a token.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that would be a cheesy but effective way of doing a circle of light.
Yeah.
And I don't mean cheesy. I mean, cheesy is the wrong word. It would be simplistic.
Sure.
But effective, because you've got good vision up to this point, and yeah, that'd be kind of neat. Actually, another thing that you could probably wind up doing, because I see that you've already got an opacity feature built into the GM map, is like if you had perfect vision for 10, 20 feet and then decent vision for 40 feet, you could probably scale down the opacity, and that would indicate penalties and stuff.
Absolutely. Let me show you real quick. This is another one of the GM features that's pretty nice. As an example, if you're going to set up an encounter in advance, let's shrink this down a little bit more. So let's say as they enter this room, that's when you want to have that famous encounter with the dire bat, and let's say 2 black bears this time. So you see on the fly, I just kind of change how many different tokens there are, and it tells me how many that I want to place. So I'm going to pre-place these in advance. So here is where the dire bat would start in that combat encounter, and maybe in the next room, I don't know if you can see it, I'm picking up and dragging the token to where they're going to
Yep, no, we can see fine.
appear at the start. So that would allow me to load them, preload them in. I'm going to come back out, get rid of it one more time, delete all my foes. So again, when you enter that room, now it knows that this is pre-linked with that map. So and that'll save in between sessions. So if I close out, come back in, I've done it the day before or whatever, when they're ready to have the encounter, I just hit this add to the combat tracker, and it automatically places them for me where they would start out on the map.
And they're invisible.
And they are invisible. And so what I can do in the background is, so again, he's in the same room. I could share them out and make them visible on a, let's see if I can get both screens at once. So I'm going to make the dire bat visible. So you just click on that and it shares it. Or, let's see, zoom out a little.
I just realized how big that dire bat was.
That dire bat's huge, yeah.
That is a ginormous bat.
So then you could do it like individually by turning them on or off, or you can just say, okay, we'll make everything visible or invisible. Then the player, the nice thing about that is that, let's bring it back over. So it's a little bit more toggle when you're showing both the player view and the GM, of course. But the thing that the player could do is they could say, okay, well, I want to do, let's say, a cone attack. So they're going to do, let's say that's a
built-in cone attack.
Yeah, you can do that sort of stuff. You could do the other pointers are you've got. Let's see.
Can you do different angles? I'm sorry, I didn't. Didn't see.
So to start over, so you come in, you say pointers. You can do a cone, you can do a circle or a square.
Okay.
Cone is definitely one of the cooler features, but it does it in your dice color. So I have the character with blue dice selected. So you have 3 or 4 players connected. It'll do their effects in their own color.
Can you do so? That's a 90-degree cone. Can you do a 45-degree cone?
Right now this one is a Pathfinder one, and the cones are actually just set at this
always one. Just quarters. Okay.
But we do have, like for instance, in Savage Worlds, it has different shaped cones that are a fixed format, and so yeah, that would have to be something built into that specific rule set to support it. But this one here, you've got you've got your squares. So if you have something that kind of emanates in an area or whatever, you can select it, pick it up, you can move it. Just move it around. You can pick it up and move it around where it is on the map. So if it's like a fog that drifts or whatever, you can move it as time goes on. and it tells you the size in that game system, basically. So what the nice things are that, you've got this character now, which, let's see if I have someone that has an attack here. They can do, let's say, and normally you would use a spell, but I've got a fighter loaded, unfortunately.
Yeah, sure.
So let's say that they wanted to target these 3 creatures. So I'm holding down Control and then just clicking on the target, multiple things. So let's say I do, I don't know, like an acid arrow against each of those. Yeah, so it rolled an attack against each target that I had targeted, and then told me which ones hit or missed or whatever. And then when I roll my damage, same thing, it rolls that damage and applies it. So if I was to look on the GM's perspective now, there should be some damage applied. Yeah, so the black bear was damaged for 6, and the dire bat was damaged for 6, but the other black bear was missed, so it didn't target him. So for you're doing your big fireballs and that sort of thing, it becomes very easy to target everything that you're going to shoot at, and then it'll automatically deselect the ones that you missed, and you just roll your damage.
Huh.
The spell functionality is something that we've invested a decent amount of time into. So again, to go back to your player, Jonah, I think, is a wizard. So here you've got a fireball attack. So that same thing is going to do 5d6 damage, and it's a reflex save DC 17. So again, you'll see that, I'll do it one more time here. If I target each of those 3 characters, and let's say first thing you did was you double checked, okay, we'll make sure, is my fireball actually going to hit them? Yeah, it hits them all. So then you target them. Move those out of the way. When you roll your attack, it rolled the dice, and you can see it's kind of behind the window, so you couldn't see. But in this case, that middle bear is no longer targeted. It missed. It made its reflex save. So
okay.
As I roll my 5d6 damage, it's going to be fire damage. Also, it would check resistances. So if the creature had resistance to fire, it would automatically deduct that for you. So it takes a lot of that minutia out of the game and allows you to just get and play faster. And you see here it actually damaged the characters at a different level.
And I see that your little power bar has dropped to half and color-coded.
Yeah, and that color coding, and that's an option that you can turn on or off to what degree you want to share that with the players, for instance. Here I'm sharing it with the players, but as an option, so I'll have the same thing open here. You can come into your preferences and you can say, what level of detail do you want? So here's like the tokens for the GM. Do you want to show effects? You can turn on or off. So like if they have different effects going, oh, that's the other thing. Like you can, if a spell has a sleep effect or a dazed effect or whatever, it'll automatically place that like as an indicator that tells you that the creature is dazed or whatever. And do you want to share that with the players? Do you want to share the health? So here's a tooltip. Now it'll show only their health when I hover over it, for instance, but it keeps the map clear. Here's an example where you just show a dot, and the dot will change colors to orange or to red or whatever. Dot, hover, and then off, or a tooltip. So as I hover over it, says, okay, I'm healthy. And then this person is actually an enemy. So this one would be, you want it to be a bar, dot, or a tooltip. So again, heavy damage, light damage, moderate damage.
Cool. No, that's really neat. So I guess is there anything else that's kicking around on the game that you really want to show us?
Yeah, I think one of the other things I think that's really pretty neat. That kind of gives you your basics. There's a ton of functionality. I could probably talk about it for hours and hours and bore everybody to death. But the library is one of the things that we really think is critical. Is that as you're building characters, and let me close down a bunch of stuff here just to make our screen a little clearer. So one of the things that's really pretty nice is when you're building your encounters in advance, or your characters, like let's say Jonah gets a new level, and then you want to add a new ability, for instance. Then I can come through and say, okay, well, is it a feat? Yeah, sure, it's a feat. And so I could just right-click and say create item, and they could say, okay, I've got this fancy dance move that I just learned. And then here you can describe, okay, what does fancy dance move do? And then you can put the game description there or any notes that you have. So if there's not support for it in the system already within Fancy Grounds, that's not a limitation. You can key in stuff as needed and drag and drop and copy and paste stuff from outside sources. But if it's something that's in, for instance, the Pathfinder SRD, then you just go to your basic rules section, pull up your feats, and then here's like a list of the various feats. So you can kind of just scroll through and pull these up. Each one of these has got the description from the SRD about what that specific feat does and what it means when you have it or don't have it. But you could also search, and you can say, well, I've got a power or something. So as you type the first couple characters, it narrows the list down, and now I've got Empower Spell. So you drag it over, and now the character has it. So in game time comes up, and they want to use it, they just click on it, open it up, and run it. So that's your kind of basic functionality on equipment. Same sort of thing. If you have an inventory item and you want to say, oh, I want to pull up a new weapon that I just bought, here you can look and see different types of weapons, or I can do a search and say, okay, well, maybe it's a type of spear. So type the first couple characters, and now, okay, is it a long spear, short spear, whatever? You drag it over, and then again, it's a lot of drag and drop functionality. And then here it actually, has our encumbrance. It'll update your encumbrance for you automatically, and then the basic stats, the critical modifier. So when you're ready, now if you look on the actions, that character now has 2 versions of a spear attack that they can use. So they can do a generic attack where it just uses their melee modifiers, or they can do a thrown version. And so you can toggle it, and it'll determine if it's going to use the dex modifier or if it's going to use their strength modifier, that sort of thing. Spells are the same thing. You can drag and drop spells over from the library. You've got your some of the nicer things I think are really the bestiaries are really, really pretty helpful. All of your demons, all of your dragons, giants, whatever, you'll have them kind of at your fingertips with all their stats kind of preloaded. And then whenever you have an encounter, like Adventure Week guys, what they did on theirs is when you have their thing loaded, it'll put a new tab that says, okay, well, this is my custom campaign. These are my monsters that I'm running. But if I want to see the monsters in this module, here's all the monsters that are pre-statted out when they bought that module. So it's the same thing if you were to buy the PDF. Now you've got them all pre-keyed in, and it just has all the same content, but it saves you the time entry of having to go through it and do those. And then here you've got, if they have extra descriptions. Here they have a strategy. What is that creature going to do when you fight? That's a skeletal wolf, for instance, and the token, which is kind of nice. They've linked it in with our tokens.
Neat. No, and that actually ties into before I go to that last kind of question, so what are you working on right now that you think is something that's a future feature, as opposed to a creature feature, or maybe it's the same thing, that your program is going to be implementing when you successfully code it?
Yeah, we've got a few things kind of in the works. The biggest thing right now, we just made it through a really big push, which put a ton of new features, like to manage your party, your entire party at a glance, to manage party inventory funds, sharing of experience, that sort of stuff. Automation for running an entire party of characters in addition to individual character rewards and so forth. So we've kind of reached somewhat of a stopping point. In addition to, we've done a lot of consolidation of our older rule sets. We have what we call a core RPG, which is a very basic vanilla system that you can use to just roll dice, share maps, images, tokens, that sort of thing, without it's kind of in a game agnostic fashion. But the nice thing about it is that we've also recoded a number of the rule sets to build off of that one. So now we can look at, if we want to add a special feature or function, we can add it to that core RPG rule set, and it will automatically roll out to each of those other game systems whenever that makes sense. So we don't have to recode it and say, okay, well, what does it look like in Castles and Crusades, or what does it look like in Pathfinder or GURPS or whatever. If GURPS, and I believe GURPS, if I'm not mistaken, was built off of the core RPG, it was rebuilt basically to use the same features. So if we add, let's say we add a town manager feature, or a shop builder or something like that, I think actually there's extensions that do that a user has built. But as we add those, it'll roll out to everything all at once. The other thing that we're doing right now is trying to get this all packaged up and ready to go on Steam. So we think that it took us about a year actually to go through their greenlight process and to get the necessary traction for them to approve it. And so now it's been approved, it's been greenlit, and we just have to take a break from doing enhancements just for a little while, and then wrap this up with Steam so that we can expand it out to the 6 million or so users that are always active on Steam at any point in time of day. So hopefully that will explode us from our user base now in the 20,000s. I think we're at 27,000 or so users to really kind of get it into the living room. That's what I'm really excited about, is like the Steam machines have the option of running on your TV and using console type remotes, or wireless mouse and keyboard and stuff. And then people could really seriously be playing Dungeons and Dragons sitting around their living room with their old college buddies, or whatever the case may be.
So that's actually a good point in a way. Is one of the things that I really do like about, for example, Roll20 on Hangouts, which is a system that that we play a lot, or just Hangouts in general, is the video, right? You've got people on the bottom of the screen. You can see their face talking like you and I are talking. Is that a feature that either is or will be enabled in Fantasy Grounds?
It's one of the things that I actually use Google Hangouts or Skype. Normally I use Skype. I think John uses Google Hangouts, but we use those same features, and I think it's it's not integrated with the app because it's not a web application at this point in time. But we don't want to run it side by side. And I think for running anything in a virtual tabletop, probably any virtual tabletop you look at, highly recommend getting just another monitor. So if you're running on your laptop, plug a monitor into your laptop. You've got the extra screen real estate, and I like to keep Skype or something running on the side, and then you can choose if you want video or if you don't want video, and then just keep Fantasy Grounds focused on the game content, and then kind of go from there. Because what we felt like it would do is it would pull us away from the automation and some of the other functions and features that we could be adding to do something that would probably be, frankly, would come out worse, I think, than what the professionals could do from Skype and from Google. So we don't want to compete with them, and those things are always going to be getting better.
Sure.
We don't want to necessarily limit ourselves and say, okay, well, let's say, for instance, we went with Google Plus. It's really good right now, but who's to say that there's not another service that comes out a year later, which is 10 times better, it's faster, and it's got more functions and features and whatever else. Then right now, by having it separate, it allows people to kind of choose what they're comfortable with.
Sure. So you mentioned it exists on the computer and it's going to be available through Steam. I assume it's not free. So if I have myself and 6 players, how much is it going to run me and them?
Sure. Now there's a couple different options. Typically, our older model was that everyone needed a license. So you would have GM licenses and player licenses, and the differences between those two licenses were, could you do content creation other than your character sheet? And so if you only wanted to do your character sheet and run your character during a combat with some general, maybe you could track your notes and track your items that you have, that sort of thing, then the player version was your choice. And that today we have on sale for $24. It's a one-time license. There's no subscription fee at all. And then every version that we've come out with, all the way from Fantasy Grounds 1, even before John and I took ownership of the company, has free upgrades to the latest version that we have available. And so we've done that since 2005. Every edition, thousands and thousands of hours of code have all kind of gone out to people that have bought in at any point in time. And then the GM license allows you to host a game, have players connect to it. You get all the campaign management functionality. You get the the ability to create your own stories and NPCs, to pull in your own images and maps, build your own library content, that sort of thing. Those run $39 right now, and then you would just each person would buy one. Now we do have some GMs who have players that either they don't think their players would spring for a service like this, or they choose to just take the burden on themselves. They buy something called an Ultimate license, and that's $150. But then the players connect for free, and that way, if they have some people will do that. It makes sense if they have like multiple groups of players that they run, or they're always inviting new people into the game. Then they don't ever have to worry about cost being a barrier to entry for their games. But I will say that regardless of whether you can talk your gaming group into playing on a virtual tabletop, one of the things that when I first came to it, I couldn't talk my local group into playing, which was pretty funny because I was moving from Champaign or Urbana, Illinois, down to local Kentucky where I've grown up, and I had a fantastic gaming group in Illinois, but some of them are just not, they don't have computers that they feel comfortable doing, or they just didn't feel like they wanted to play it online. So I bought Fantasy Grounds just as a GM license myself, and I connected and played with people that I'd never ever met in person. Even to this day, I've never met them in person. And I will say that I've made the same lasting bonding friendships that I've made with people that I've met at a local gaming store. and there's a ton of users out there. There's a bunch of other players looking to game at all different times, all throughout the world. We've got people in the United Kingdom that are playing, in Brazil, and all over the world. I see every once in a while people from like Timbuktu will log in, and you're like, that's really there really is a Timbuktu, and people do game there. So it's interesting to see, and there's just tons of games out there, and Fantasy Grounds is one option, but any virtual tabletop, I think you'd be surprised to see to what degree you can really play a game and have the same sort of experience, or maybe even a better experience than you would have in person.
Yeah, I think that's and that brings us sort of I think summarize it well. The future of virtual tabletops and online gaming in general. It sounds like you characterize it as just broader, right? There's tons of people potentially gaming, lots of availability. You can link up to almost any game as long as you kind of obey some basic social contract rules.
Yeah.
So I mean, and in a way, I guess the Fantasy Grounds has started it. But do you ever think that the publishing of games and the gaming software will be more closely linked? And honestly, the Adventure a Week module, where it's basically like you can buy the digital adventure and just pop it right into Fantasy Grounds, is the closest I've seen to that. It's a fully implemented module.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that's definitely where we see a lot of opportunity in the future, and we've had conversations with the guys with the folks at Paizo and with Wizards of the Coast as well about doing that same sort of thing for their adventures and encounters, and we've built a lot of those our own libraries of stuff ourselves, so it's definitely doable, and it's definitely something that we do with other publishers. We've got I don't know 16, 17 different publishers that we do that with, and so they could be something from an adventure module, or it could be our library modules are really nice. Like Call of Cthulhu has got tons and tons of just splat book type things that you can go through and you can read all about a specific setting. Maybe it's a time and era or whatever, and then to put it directly into the tool so that people don't have to have a PDF version and then key it all in. Because really the keying in of the data can become a barrier to playing online. Unless you have a whole lot of time.
No, that's right, and that's actually the next question before I sort of give you the last word. It seems to me that the real barrier to entry for people who are not XML coders would be some kind of automated scripting tool or tools that would enable Joe user. Like myself, right? I'm 42 years old. I can do some coding. I used to, but I don't know XML. I think the last real coding experience that I had might have been a little bit of Visual Basic. I'm sure that I could do coding, learn how to do it, but I got a little girl and I got other things to do than write program. But I would love to be able to go boom, 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 and do monsters or do characters or upload maps or have some customized rules or, I really like the new firearms rules that Hans Christian Borders just published in Pyramid, or I want to do X or Y, and it'd be really nice to be able to go click, 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 drag, go, and remove that barrier to entry for the casual gamer.
Absolutely, and that's really got to be key. That's where I think that Fantasy Grounds really stands shoulders above a lot of the competition, because especially in the areas where we have game systems that are supported, either with an official rule set that we've developed or with one that the community members have developed, you get so much out of the box where it has all that sort of functionality. It may not have every single feature of a game system implemented, but it'll get you up and running in no time. And if you look at that and then you look at what is it like to play that same game around the table, you don't need everything to be automated. And I would caution against that, especially in the very beginning. You just really want to be able to roll the dice. Even if you were to game on a system that is there's no system support for it whatsoever, load up Core RPG and just share your images and your maps and your stories. And then, the dice is still going to be, you're going to roll the dice and look at it just like you would around the table. So that shouldn't really limit you from doing that. I wouldn't encourage people to look at this and say, wow, they could do all these things, and they buy Fantasy Grounds, and the very first thing they do is start trying to code. No, that's probably not the right approach. In fact, I would recommend against that. I would recommend that you get a system, you look at all the ones that are out there, you say, okay, well, is there a game system supported that I do want to play? I would encourage you to play that game system for a while and see how it is, or to stay in that sandbox, because that will also show you how things are implemented. Like, you don't want to start developing your own version until you see, okay, well, it worked really, really well. in this system. You know, for instance, I see how they did it in Pathfinder, and yeah, I can see how it would make sense here. You don't want to jump in to the deep end from the very beginning. You want to, you know, get your feet underneath you and just get comfortable playing with it and using the features that are there, and then look and see, well, what do I really need to expand? And then really kind of ask yourself those questions as you go forward.
No, and that's it. Yeah, exactly. And I guess, you know, as I'm contemplating my own campaign, you know, what I'm going to want to be able to do is either within Fantasy Grounds or some other program, I'm going to want a map. And very clearly, I can bring in a map. I can darken it up with masking. I can put a hex grid on it. Then I'll have to import characters, which I know that there's a GURPS character assistant to Fantasy Grounds tool that I saw online, which is kind of awesome. And I just got to
just key them in. You know, I mean, that other thing is it'll give you a blank character sheet for a GURPS character, and then you just fill in your own stats. I mean, all of those are typable areas, and it looked like they'd actually coded them up so that you could do your 3d6 dice rolls automatically. You know,
yep, I saw that. Yep. And I actually got a note that someone logged into the YouTube feed and left a comment saying that an upgrade for all the different features that you and I have been discussing is in the works for the latest GURPS rules.
Oh yeah, I mean sometimes you'll be amazed at, and I'm always amazed at what the community members that are out there do today, because a lot of them are professional programmers or graphic artists or both, and this is their hobby. I mean, the development of these really automated, sophisticated systems they get as much enjoyment out of that as they do even playing the game sometimes. So. You know, sometimes just getting onto the forums and saying, hey, this would be really cool if you do that. If they have an audience for it, it's amazing what people will put together. I mean,
right.
We've seen people write. One guy wrote an extension which was very, very clever. Someone made a suggestion on the forum and said, you know, it'd be cool if you could speak in the chat window in different languages, and only people that knew that language on the character sheet could read it. So he made something where you could speak in Elvish or Dwarven or whatever, and you change which language you're talking in, and it writes out like Elvish-looking script into the chat window if you don't know Elvish. And then if you do know Elvish, it puts a little tag and says this is in Elvish, so that you know that they're speaking in Elvish, but you can read the text clearly. I mean, how clever is that? That's, to me, my mind is always boggled by seeing what people can do and how creative and how talented members of our community are. And a lot of it comes into the tool. You know, a lot of times one of our users made all sorts of stuff, and then he actually skinned out our 4th edition rule set and a lot of our other graphics. He's actually created graphics and said, hey, this is what I did for my own personal use. If you guys like it, feel free to use it. And so we've said, okay, we looked at it, we integrated it in with our system, and we shared it out with all the users. Now it's an option. They can say, oh, I want it to look with, you know, the stone version, you know, with its skin, or, you know, that sort of thing gets rolled up a lot because the community members, especially if they're going to invest time in developing something like that, they just want to see it be used, you know.
Right. No, that's yeah, you know, the amount of money I'll get from any one pyramid article or even my technical grappling book is fairly minuscule relative to the satisfaction for getting a good play report.
Absolutely. And we do have the option if people want to sell something. Like we have one player that built. At this point in time, we didn't have templates implemented, so he wanted to have all of the summoned monsters in a table. So he went through and he just entered in all the NPCs and statted them all out, and then said, hey, I use this for my game, do you think the users would like it? And so I said, oh yeah, sure. So I helped him get it loaded up onto our store. He sells it, and then every quarter I send him commissions on that.
Right.
Or
cool.
royalties on that. And so, you know, we have that option if people choose to go that route, or people want to just share things for free, they can go that route too. So I think we try to cater to both audiences there.
No, that's really cool. So I always give my guests the last word. I think it's probably about wrap-up time. We've been chatting for a bit, and I'm very interested in the Fantasy Grounds. I have to figure out which VTT I'm going to wind up using. But I know I'm going to use one because I don't have a gaming group here. So as we wrap up here, what's the last word you want to give for people who are interested in Fantasy Grounds, interested in VTTing, or you know, if you want to talk about anything gaming related, just not religion or politics?
Yeah. So I'll avoid the religion and politics, although sometimes gaming gets just as heated, I suppose.
I was thinking about the same thing. So, but yeah.
I would ultimately say that, you know, a lot of the systems you can go in, you can download and try them, and I would encourage people to try out Fantasy Grounds. I hope that they would. Our demo is free. It's up on our website. They can download it. They can run two instances of it and then connect to each other. it won't save things, but I think it'll give them a taste of if the application is good for them. We also have a ton of YouTube videos they can kind of go through and follow along. And I would just encourage people to, if they haven't tried virtual tabletop gaming yet, to give it a shot and to try multiple things. So don't just try one game system and then say, or one virtual tabletop and say, yeah, it's for me or it's not for me, because the experience is significantly different between like us and Roll20 or D20 Pro or Mac Tools. Each one of those environments caters to a slightly different audience, I think. Some of them are easier to get off the ground and running, but some of them have more or less features. And you need to find the one that fits for you. And I think it's worth doing the investment of, maybe you take a week or two and you try out all the different ones before you make a decision. But if you do join Fantasy Grounds, I think you'll find that there's a very friendly community, and we'd be happy to have you.
Okay, well, I want to thank you for your time and for joining us and for the detailed walkthrough of Fantasy Grounds. I enjoyed it. It was good to see the GURPS support that is out there, and I'll link to that, to both the wiki and to the video that you showed me where it was the GCA export. Because honestly, for GURPS, making a character is very front-loaded experience. You don't just, Swords and Wizardry or the old the old D6 Star Wars, 5 minutes and you're got a character and you're ready to play. With GURPS, you can do that.
Yeah.
But often you're buying and you're optimizing, and then you've got a pretty good character ready to go, and then you can just play. But to go through and do GURPS character system and then to say, boom, here's an import, and you throw it up and you can drag and roll dice and all that stuff is a very exciting capability for front-loaded systems.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's something that, so I certainly learned about Fantasy Grounds and wanted to thank you for walking me through it. But again, thank you for your time, and as new features or anything come out, then the firing squad always has a spot on the wall.
Great. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks a lot.